Live from the NBC 15 studios. Your voice, your future. A live town hall meeting. Tonight's discussion, the opioid crisis.
What do an injured high school athlete, a housewife recovering from surgery, and a construction worker fighting tooth pain have in common? They were all prescribed painkillers or opioids, two of the three becoming addicted. According to numbers from the CDC, Alabama doctors write the most prescriptions for painkillers per person. The number of people dying from opioid overdoses is on the rise, 324 statewide last year. One of those statistics, Jace Waters. Your average Baldwin County kid. Jace loved baseball, fishing, and hunting. Entering high school, his love for baseball grew. Jace became an above-average pitcher at Robertsdale High School. Home video shows him showcasing his skills for college teams, eventually signing with the University of West Alabama as a starting pitcher his freshman year. But a back injury from high school would eventually change the course of Jace's college career and his life.
He was prescribed by the doctor physical therapy and Lortab. And little did we know where that was really going to take us.
It was the start of a 12-year battle with opioid and drug addiction.
He would spiral in and out of treatment centers, sobriety, relapse, and then sadly even sometimes in jail.
Julie Waters says like many parents faced with a child battling drug addiction, she really didn't know what to do. She tried everything, private counseling, inpatient rehab, and all she could do was watch the hope and joy seep right out of her son's eyes. From Lortab to OxyContin to cocaine and eventually heroin, Jace's addiction to drugs grew stronger. It was a cycle Julie says her son could not break.
You know, people think it's a lack of moral principles, or they think that it's just a lack of willpower, and it's not. These drugs do damage to his brain to where, even though he begged to quit, he begged to get help, he just could not control that urge the way his brain was telling him that he needed this drug to survive.
Eventually, Jace lost his drug battle and his life to a heroin overdose inside an Arizona hotel room.
They had to take the hinges off the door because he had fallen against the floor. And they said, "Sir, he's dead." And he had overdosed that night before coming home.
Julie said her son hated the addiction. He would cry out for help.
This is my book.
She says it's too late for her son, but not for others, and she has this plea to doctors.
Don't prescribe the drugs for every little toothache or every little small hurt that you have. It has its place, and doctors need to know where that place is, and it's not long-term, it's very short-term.
Julie Waters has established the Jace Waters Foundation to raise scholarship money for addicts to go to in-house treatment facilities and to also start one in memory of her son Jace. Cases like Jace's are the reason we here at NBC 15 are hosting a roundtable discussion on the opioid crisis. Tonight, I'll be taking questions from you on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and sending them over to my co-anchor Greg Peterson, who is standing by now in our studio with our panel. Greg?
Kim, thanks so much, and thank you for joining us tonight for this very important NBC 15 Your Voice, Your Future panel discussion on the opioid crisis. We have assembled a very distinguished panel from different backgrounds. The views they express are their own, unless they state otherwise. From my left, Dr. Richard Euler, a board-certified emergency medicine specialist, along with Virginia Guy, Executive Director of the Drug Education Council. On my right, Christy Wells, a recovery advocate, and Tommy Witten, a treatment specialist. Thanks to all of you for being here this evening, and I want to begin by showing some numbers, the cold hard facts about opioid addiction and why this truly is a national crisis. 61% of all overdose deaths in the country involve an opioid. 91 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. 3 people will die during the course of this discussion. In 2015, there were more than 33,000 opioid deaths. And is the problem growing? Well, you be the judge. Deaths from prescription opioids are up 400% since 1999. The numbers are very sobering. When it comes to overdosing, there are no boundaries. When it comes to age, race, gender, income, this is indeed a public health emergency. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Dr. O, let's begin with you. Now, you were on the front lines for many, many years in the emergency rooms. What did you see first about the numbers? You were in there for 22 years. I would imagine you have seen that problem grow.
Absolutely. It was a problem I don't think any of us saw coming, but in the emergency department in particular, our sense for those abusing narcotics was 5% a shift, grew to 10%, and by the turn of the century was up to 20% of our patients we believed were abusing drugs. And they would package it often with, I've got a kidney stone. You would see them cut their finger, drop blood in the urine sample, but I can't get an IVP because I'm allergic to the dye. And well, CAT scan sort of advanced about the turn of the century and sort of eliminated that. We'll have them come in at 5:30 on a Friday. I've got a toothache and my tooth's broken off. And as the technology for the internet allowed us to start going in and researching those names, you found that they were going from ER to ER to ER with the same complaint. Back pain's always another great one. My back's killing me, my leg's killing me, the pain's going down my leg, and I can't get an MRI at night. So it's either call them a liar or believe what they're telling you. And in medicine, you've got to believe your patient. And if you start, segregating who you're going to do, you're going to get it wrong sometimes. So, but the technology, particularly the ability for us to log in and see a patient online and see where they've been, is huge. It's just recently got where you can go out of state though. So we really need a national database that we can access and tie it to the pharmacy and electronic prescribing and really help out. But it really was a big problem.
We'll talk about the blame a little bit later on. Virginia, you have seen this problem increase as well. Talk about from your perspective as far as the Drug Education Council.
Right. The thing that I find the most heartbreaking about this is the pain that families go through when they've got a loved one that has developed a dependency or an addiction to opioids, and the person seems to start spiraling out of control. We know that the disease is permanent, progressive, and potentially fatal. We also know that during that time the family is also progressing in the disease, and the entire family needs to get help.
Let's go down the line, and Christy, I want to go ahead and familiarize our viewers a little bit more with you. You have quite a remarkable story to tell, and the fact that you're sitting here is pretty remarkable. Everybody has a story to tell. Talk about why you're sitting here right now.
Basically, I'm sitting here right now to make an attempt to eradicate the stigma that is affiliated with addiction. I'm in long-term recovery from opiate addiction and was in a coma from a suicide attempt that I made because I didn't know that there was really help for people like me. The shame base that goes on here about addiction, now fortunately we know that it is a chronic disease model that matches anything from diabetes to heart disease and things like that. But being in the Deep South, we have a lot of religious biases and things like that that can be very harmful to people like me and others like me. And so I'm sitting here to try to tell people that you can't sink a whole lot lower than I sank in my addiction. And I believe in recovery because I am in recovery, and it's not always easy, but it's something that we can do. It's treatable and it's manageable, but it is not curable.
And we're talking about, you had children at that time that you were going through this in your life. Mm-hmm. Were those people aware that you had the issues that you had, the addiction to opioids?
Yes.
And still, it was so tough to find that recovery, find the place to help you out. I would imagine that it is such a lonely place, even though there are people reaching out to you.
It's a horribly lonely place, and I was married to a physician here locally for 21 years, and I became the shame of the town, and there'll be mugshots posted of me, and that's what I used to look like. And they're horrible pictures, and I don't mind sharing them though, because if I hadn't taken the journey that I did take at that time, and all the way currently, I'm a convicted felon. My children had to endure a lot of horrible shame, and it's my fault. And I could wallow around in that, but fortunately coming out the other side. My children and I are able to communicate. We talk very openly about addiction. I share in schools and communities and work a lot with Virginia, trying to help people get into prevention before they end up as far gone as I was. And had I known there was help for people like me, I would like to think that I would have sought help much earlier in my addiction and not perhaps gone to a suicide level and being a convicted felon as I am today.
You talk about prevention. Was it a situation where somebody did try and prevent it, or were you an adult, it was easily obtained, and it was just convenient, and it started small, innocently, and then just grew?
It did. I had a back injury. It's very textbook. A severe back injury with the leg radiating pain and all that, and was taken to an emergency room in a hospital, and I was given opiates, and I was able to take them correctly for several years off and on. But what happens with a lot of us who are addicts, number one, we have different receptors in our brains. They're a little different than an average person's receptors, and our bodies behave differently when we're given those types of medications. And we call that sometimes in the field a perfect storm. And what happened was my marriage began to fall apart. And I began to take more pills, not just for physical pain, but for the emotional pain that I was suffering. And I went from taking 4, and back then it was Lortab, now it's Norco, but same thing. I started out taking 2 to 4 pills a day, and at the end of my addiction, I took 70 Lortab 10s every single day of my life, and it was to avoid the withdrawal, which is debilitating and horrible.
And it got to the point where you wanted to end it all.
Yes.
Tommy, talk a little bit about your specialty, which is treatment, and where you are, what you go through on a day-to-day basis, and what you're seeing right now as far as this epidemic.
Yeah, well, I'm the South Mississippi, South Alabama treatment specialist for addiction campuses. We're a network of treatment facilities across the country. Basically, we provide resources and for people that are battling the disease of addiction. We set people up with run insurances, process people through the facilities, and then provide them with aftercare options, IOP options, things of that nature once they get through their length of stay at the facility. The thing I see in the field, most of the time, it's meth is a lot that I see, heroin, of course the opioids. But it's more providing resources for people that they are able to know where they can go for treatment, where they can seek help. It is a disease, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, and it's something that we want to be able to provide those people those resources.
And you talk about prevention. There has been a war on drugs in this country for almost 40 years now. And I see smiles from these experts here. Just say no. That's something that's really obviously hasn't worked. What is it that will work? What do you guys see on a daily basis that you think, is prevention feasible? Is education feasible? Or is it that there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population that gets hooked up on this and they don't realize how damaging it is? A lot of people don't realize heroin is an opiate, and people start innocently and then wind up on heroin, shooting up, and that's one of the ugliest sides of this, not just popping a pill.
Yeah, I mean it's both. I mean the education component is making providing the information to the general public so that they're aware of what's available out there for them, and then once they are aware of it, being able to be boots on the ground, first there, 100%, 24 hours available for these people. That's the biggest component, because when an addict makes the conscious decision to get sober, the worst thing you want is that they don't know what to do and they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs and don't know where to go. With an addict, you have to strike while the iron's hot to make sure that you can be that avenue, that resource for them, so that they can get into treatment. Once you get to that point, that's half the battle right there. After that, you figure out payer source, transportation, things of that nature, and after that, you get them to treatment, and you work the process, work the steps.
All right, we're getting some questions from social media right now. Let's go back to Kim Anderson with the latest. Kim?
Hi, Greg. Now, Christy Wells mentioned something about the perfect storm when she was prescribed drugs. That's one viewer is asking, are certain people predisposed to becoming addicted to opioids?
That's a good question. Are people predisposed to becoming, and I think we touched on that a little bit. I know that Christy mentioned it. What do you think, Doc?
I think we're learning more about that, and there's certainly some genetic predispositions to that. Your family was an alcoholic or has an addictive personality, you're at more risk for that. It doesn't mean that it has to happen, but I think that it certainly can happen. Christy probably knows much more about that than I, but if I'm not mistaken, I think that's sort of the latest understanding.
It is, and I think, you know, more and more, even each week, it seems the research is pointing more toward a genetic predisposition. And certainly in my case, my family on both sides is loaded with alcoholism, and my father, who was a veteran, who died from his addiction in the long run, unfortunately, and unfortunately didn't see me get sober, but our entire side of the family has that issue. And one thing that we can talk about as far as prevention goes, and Virginia is very good about this, when we can look at a family and see where they're coming from and try to intervene before it gets out of hand and educate people about what can happen and how it happens. And I think, like anyone else, we all think it's not going to happen to us until it happens to us, and then we don't know what to do, and we don't know what's available and whether we can afford it. And many addicts, and by the time my addiction hit rock bottom, I didn't have any health insurance, I didn't have Medicaid, I didn't have anything. So I was taken from jail to a nonprofit treatment facility, which was supported by United Way of Baldwin County, and they were able to assist me, but it took me months to even get healthy enough to sort of walk and chew gum at the same time. It was terrible.
So I think as we look forward at what can be done better, I think to try and stop this crisis, I think we're going to find there's many points. One would be for those families that have that predisposition, they need to have an open discussion about, you don't need the opioids, you don't need alcohol in your life because of this. And I think that's one open discussion. There's many we're going to have tonight, but I think that's one very important one.
And Virginia, as far as some of the early signs that if you're a parent and you have a teenager, and if you keep a blind eye to it, eventually something bad is going to happen. What should these parents look for in their kids?
Right. There's definitely a genetic predisposition, but the number one predictor of whether people will become addicted or not is the early onset of alcohol and drug use. So one of the biggest ways to prevent anybody from becoming addicted is to delay the onset of first use. We know that if somebody starts to use alcohol or drugs when they're 14 or 15, they have about a 45 to 47% chance of becoming addicted. That same person, if they wait until they're 21, it drops down to 9%. So that is really statistically significant, and that's even factoring in the genetic predisposition for families. So we know that it's a brain disease, and we know that the brain develops during those teen years. It's doing a lot of important wiring, and just like Christy said, you know, the brain of a person with substance use disorder behaves very differently, and some of that develops during those teen years. So the addicts that we're seeing now that are putting needles in their arm and overdosing at 31, they didn't start using that at 25. Typically, they started drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, and that set their brain up for addiction later on. They started when they were 14 and 15. We know that 90% of addiction is established in the brain at 14, 15, even if it doesn't present itself until the person's in their 20s. So the research on this is really clear, and if the one thing that parents can do is, even if they just delay the use from 15 to 17, they can definitely lower the amount, because a lot of parents will say to me, well, I know when he goes off to college he's going to drink. But if they can even delay the child drinking until they go to college, they've you know, significantly you know, diminished the chances of that person becoming addicted. And if they can wait until they're later, till the brain is completely developed, really it goes way down, because very different things happen in the brain of a teenager or an adult when alcohol and drugs are presented in it.
We talk about gateway drugs in a lot of states right now, legalizing marijuana. Tommy, I want to talk to you a little bit about the gateway situation with marijuana and some of these other drugs that seem to be becoming a little more accepted in our society. States are legalizing it. I've talked to a lot of law enforcement officers either through my job or just friends, who say they don't know necessarily that smoking marijuana will lead to it, but rarely do they know any opioid addicts who didn't start with marijuana.
Right. Yeah, and I mean it's the same. It goes back to the same mentality of the chemical imbalance in the brain and the predisposition to it. So if you are use something early on, it's once you get immersed into that culture and into that use, you're going to move forward, and eventually that drug of choice is not going to provide the same high as it did when you first used it. So at that point, you move forward to whatever it is that's going to give you that high, and as you get more immersed into that community, into that culture, you start to use heavier drugs, and then before you know it, you're at the heroin levels, and you're taking opioids at high levels. And the main thing is trying to see if you can catch it on the front end of it, kind of lessen the blow per se, and make it to where it's a little bit more manageable. Basically, it goes back to that education point too. I mean, educate the general public, educate the people, and let them know that once you encounter a loved one or a friend, family member, whoever that is using these drugs, to seek treatment on the front end for the earlier dispositions rather than trying to ignore it and then tackle it on the back end when it gets to the point that it's substantially life-threatening.
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly do appreciate the fact that you've joined us for this very important conversation, and the fact that you're interacting with us is wonderful. We're getting some questions on our social media. Kim Anderson has another one of those questions. Kim?
Greg, you mentioned about Alabama's high rate of opioid addiction. One viewer wants to know, does the fact that Alabama historically is among the unhealthiest states have a direct correlation to the drug problem here? I mean, are we a problem area because we are unhealthy as a whole?
That's a great question, and I think, Virginia, you may have some answers to that.
You know, there's a lot of research on that. I know that one of the things that with our rates of obesity and other kinds of chronic diseases, there are more opiates being prescribed. So there is a correlation between the general health of the community and the increased prescribing of these drugs, which then leads to addiction for some people. So there's a real connection.
Another interesting factor was from 1999 to 2008, there was an increase of opioid use. And from 2008 to 2014, it went down. And then it started trickling back up from 2014 to current. And that directly mirrors the recession. Is the opioid addiction, especially among teenagers, a situation where if you have the money sitting around, they're a little easier to get? Have you noticed anything like that? Does it have anything to do with, those kinds of levels of income, or anything that you can pinpoint, or is anybody just as susceptible as anyone else? Anyone's
just as susceptible as anybody else. I mean, it's not really a financial burden, because you can go into any teenager can go into their grandmother's medicine cabinet and find them. That's what's made it. One of the factors why it has become so prevalent now is because it's more readily available. It's easier to get. You're basically going to. You don't have to go to what you would call a bad area of town to get it anymore. You can find it in homes. You can find it next door. You can find it anywhere that anybody is getting any type of prescription. So it's not as financially taxing as it was, as some drugs were in the past. That's why you see it a little bit more prevalent now than you would any other major type of drug. And Christy, it was a different situation for you. It was right there, as available as it possibly could be.
Yes, and when I first began abusing the drugs, they were still sampled at that time, and they're not now, not like they were. But I sort of disagree with some of with what you're saying, but a lot of it I do agree with. For me, it was a tremendous financial burden. I was taking 70 pills a day at $12 a pill. So you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that I ran through of our family's income by taking massive credit card debt out and maxing them out and buying. I mean, I always bought 1,000 or 2 pills at a time because I couldn't go any length of time. How easily were they to get? How easy were they? They weren't that easy. I mean, I had a female drug dealer and a male drug dealer, and they were.
So you didn't go through the doctor?
Yeah, I did that too, but you can't get any doctor to prescribe 70 pills a day.
Right.
So it became a full-time job to go, and I had notebooks, thick notebooks in my car with different identities, different addresses, different social security numbers, phone numbers. And when I went into a pharmacy to forge prescriptions, which is what I was convicted of doing, I would go in with a fake name and cash in my pocket. And if they asked for an ID, I just walked out. And I was able to get by with that, unfortunately, for a very long time. And I'm very thankful today that I was prosecuted. If I hadn't been prosecuted, I would be dead. And so, shout out to the Fairhope Police Department and Baldwin County Sheriff's. But it was a very, very expensive, it wiped out most of my family's income. And I'm bankrupt now because of that. So
70 Loratabs a day. Is there still a high, or is it just
no,
a matter of
not
nothing
then.
left?
No, it was avoidance of withdrawal. And I would, the only thing I didn't use was
Your
heroin.
body becomes, it has to have it.
It has to have it, and most people, that's the reason that most people change over to heroin is the expense. And he's right about that, because that's very inexpensive to get high and a long high from heroin, where if you take something like a Norco, you've just got, if you're addicted, maybe an hour that it's going to even do anything for you. So, and I still struggle with things like surgeries and things that I've had to have done. They have to have a team in there to do everything from anesthesia and pain management and all that kind of thing, because my tolerance is still ridiculous. And this has been almost 10 years. So,
Doc, I know that you've probably been around people who are withdrawing and trying to get off it. And talk about, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but get more in depth now as far as the effects of coming off once you're addicted. It obviously is very difficult to do.
Very, very difficult to do. A lot of the addicts, they feel like they're going to die. And for opiates, usually you take almost to that point of dying, but you don't. There's some other ones, the benzodiazepines, that you can actually have seizures and die. But you have blood pressure issues. Your blood pressure can go sky high and have secondary problems of stroke. There's terrible diarrhea, nausea, and they just feel terrible. And the addiction starts with euphoria, but it ends with taking it just to not feel bad. And it's a terrible, terrible situation. And heroin in particular, I think they will tell you anything. They'd sell their mother to get that heroin to not feel that bad. So it's a real terrible thing. We'll have people come in the emergency department when I used to work there, and occasionally they'll come in to the urgent care wanting help. But as Christy alluded to, sometimes they've lost their job, they've lost their family, they have no resources. Alabama's not been known for having a great abundance of funding for that sort of thing, and so it's tough to get them help because no one wants to help them without a insurance card or something, and so they're just sort of in this terrible place where they know it's a problem, they can't just get help. So I mean, it's a real struggle, and so we're trying to get them better and trying to get them in to see someone, and it's really tough, particularly in Alabama. It's a little tougher than some of the other states.
Kim has another question from social media. Kim?
I do. Greg, Gina Goldsmith is watching online, and she wanted to know about the all-natural, she says, or synthetic drug Kratom. She says that this also helps with pain. Why can't patients take this instead of opioid?
Well, who wants to answer that?
we're both laughing.
And why?
That is one of my platforms that just peeves me. I understand that Kratom can relieve pain, and it does do, it behaves very similarly to an opiate. Unfortunately, though, Kratom, and I don't think people talk about this very openly, and Virginia and I have struggled. The more she and I learn together about Kratom, there's a lot of support by the Kratom industry, and people talk about, the big pharma and all that. Well, there's big pharma behind Kratom. You can call it whatever you want to. It is an herb, but just because something is an herb doesn't mean it's good for us, and it doesn't mean it isn't addictive. I mean, all the drugs that we take, including opiates, came from a plant. So we can call it whatever we want, but Kratom is addictive, and as a professional in the field, when I was executive director at a local treatment center, we had people who came into treatment addicted to nothing but Kratom, and they had withdrawals similar to heroin withdrawal. The addiction rate is very, very high, and the relapse rate was very, very high. Furthermore, when we try to help others who have drug issues, many things that take place are drug tests where we can help them stay on track and their legal issues and all that going on. Well, the testing for kratom runs between $75 and $100 for one test. So we're looking back at the financial situation too, and it's very, very difficult for local treatment facilities, emergency rooms to test for it because they change the chemicals all the time, very akin to spice. And the emergency rooms probably see more of it than they have any idea they're seeing. But it is addictive, and it's not altogether safe. Virginia and I kind of believe, and she can speak more on this, but if you're going to take something, even if it's not great, at least get it through the FDA where we know that the dose is this is going to possibly happen, these are the side effects. We still don't have all that data on kratom or even people who love to talk about legalizing medical marijuana. There's no such thing as medical marijuana. It hasn't been tested. It's just, a crapshoot. So kratom is something that I've seen firsthand destroy people's lives just as much as an opiate has. And again, that is my opinion, but it's also backed up by a lot of research.
Virginia, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say kratom is something that I haven't heard of. Is it a big problem right now?
Well, kratom just last year has been made illegal in the state of Alabama. It's legal still, or it's not illegal in some of our neighboring states, but Alabama has made it illegal. The DEA recommended that kratom be made illegal. Mm-hmm. And as Christy said, there's been a lot of people, it's very, very controversial, and the kratom industry is incredibly powerful. But there have been a lot of people that present for treatment that kratom is their only drug of choice. So and it does act just like opiates, but it isn't as regulated, so you don't really know exactly how much you're getting, because it's
when you talk about heroin and being somewhat of a child of the 60s, you think of the 1960s and the early 70s, a lot of folks taking heroin. You've seen the old film of people shooting up in a heroin den, and for a while there it seemed like a lot of that problem had gone away. I don't know whether it was just we didn't report on it quite as much, the problem wasn't as bad, and it got better, but now it seems like it has really picked up, and I think you've probably seen a lot of that where you are not only at Compass but also in the emergency rooms.
That's right. It's hitting every walk of life. I think some of the drugs in the past used to be more fashionable, cocaine or crack or crystal meth. Heroin now, particularly in the economics of it, is very inexpensive, but it's highly addictive. The numbers are something like 40% are addicted after a first time use, and you can take it any way. You can ingest it, swallow it, smoke it, inject it, and we have people that come in the emergency department crying for help. They're addicted, they're usually shooting up. You can see the track marks on their arm, and it's a terrible thing, but it's not the poor, it's not the rich, it's all walks of life. And I think that's one thing where parents can get inside that circle of friends, get inside those text messages and see what's going on, because that's something you have to be involved and see what's going on. But highly, highly addictive, and a lot of these poor women in particular get hooked on heroin, end up in the prostitution or sex trafficking because they're so addicted they'll do anything to get that heroin. It's a terrible scourge on our community.
The question is, and this is what we always get back to when we do these town halls, is how can we stop the problem? There's no fix, there's no magic bullet, obviously. Where does it begin? As we mentioned before, the Reagans, war on drugs, just say no. And then all sorts of money has been thrown at these problems. What's working, what's not working? You guys are in the battlefield.
If you want to go ahead.
Why not? I think, like the doctor was mentioning, a lot of the problem is funding, and yes, money's been thrown at it, but has it been thrown correctly? Our mental health.
Where does it need to be thrown at?
In the mental health field. The funding has been cut and cut and cut and cut, and then we have people who need mental health care, and a lot of people, and I'm one of them, was diagnosed as bipolar. Well, turns out now that I'm sober, I'm not diagnosed with bipolar disease anymore, but they're very, very similar, and I think that I've never ever met an addict of anything at any time who isn't struggling with incredible issues of self-esteem and depression to the point of suicide, which I completely understand. And all these, we have so many community agencies in Mobile and Baldwin counties that can work together and try to help, but a lot of the agencies for people, and I know that he deals with this, who don't have any money or insurance or family or anything else, they're just left stranded. And many of them are in jail and they don't belong there. And people are being mistreated in jail and prosecuted for something they could get treatment for far cheaper.
That's what I was going to say. You said earlier that you owe your life to the Fairhope Police Department and the Baldwin County Sheriff's Department. But you can't cure this through jail cells.
No.
And so I want to make sure that people don't think that that's what you're saying, is that because you went to jail, you got cured. And curing behind bars doesn't work, does it?
No, I mean, it's one of the things that we focus on a lot is speaking with parole officers and judges, attorneys, trying to not only free up that bed space in the jail itself, but to also realize that these people have low-lying or underlying mental health issues as well as the addiction. And so, for instance, our facilities are dual diagnosis, so we can treat the mental health side as well as the substance abuse side. And then as far as funding goes, it's one of those situations where through our treatment specialist network that I have with other treatment professionals in the field, I can usually find treatment options for any walk of life, any payer source, any financial situation that's out there. It's something that I take rather seriously, is to be able to have that network of people that I can help out anybody that might have no money or low income. I have options for them as well, and I'm able to do that through those relationships, partnerships with other facilities, not only in the state of Alabama, but Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, to provide options for these people.
We hear about treatment facilities a lot. What is the percentage of success rate? And I know that it's successful when you walk out the door,
right?
But then
I always tell people it's kind of like measuring a first down in football.
Right.
It's an inexact science.
Yeah.
Reason being is because treatment is built 100% behind anonymity. So people that come through treatment facilities, that's a big deal. That is that is their life, their private time, and it's not many people are going to go through treatment and volunteer up that information. I deal with a lot of all walks of life, health professionals, doctors, nurses, physicians, attorneys, people that if they were to know that they were battling this addiction, they wouldn't, it would be frowned upon. And it goes back to what you were saying with the stigma of people that are in recovery, that are battling addiction. It's, I was talking to somebody earlier this week and I said, why do we not treat addicts the same way we treat people that are battling cancer? You don't shy away and push a person battling cancer to the side. You bring them in, you love them, and you find options for them. Addicts, right now, it seems like it's more kind of handle it on your own, you figure it out, when it should be bring that person in, help them find the resources, educate them on the process, and then help them succeed. And that's one of the things that I try to do, especially in Alabama, is to raise that awareness, or raise that educate the general public on what's available, and to let them know that there is treatment available, and it's getting the word out.
Mm-hmm. And you have to seek it. You
right.
have to want it. Yeah. We're so excited that so many of you on social media are interacting with us, asking us questions. And Kim, you have another one.
I do. This question comes from Linda Cheek, and this question I think is for Tommy more so. What is the success rate for curing addiction at centers?
That's funny. I just asked you that question. I apologize I didn't know that's what she was going to ask. But there is no cure.
Right.
Addicts are always recovering. There is no cure, and it's a battle each and every day.
It is, and I used to collect when I was the director at a treatment center. This question was asked every single day, 100 different ways, and when we were trying to get funding, because where I worked was a nonprofit and a charitable agency, and people expected those answers. How many people that leave your program are still sober today? Well, generally speaking, and this is sort of accepted across the board, if someone, first of all, the longer someone remains in residential treatment, the better opportunity they have to stay clean and sober, because I'm here to tell you, I didn't become an addict overnight, and you don't get sober or clean overnight. You have to learn a lot of things, and your whole life has to change, and that's not instantaneous. And secondly, we look at things like, if they complete your program, maybe it's 4 months or 6 months long, well, that's a success. But also the anonymity and HIPAA protection for people.
Sure.
You don't always get those things, and they don't really want to revisit that. I am not, and this is only for my personal life, I am not anonymous, very obviously so. But I think that sometimes we can look at something, and I think the magic number now seems to be, am I right, Virginia, 2 years is usually when people really have a good chance to remain sober. And they have to do a lot of things for the rest of their lives. And that's where I think a lot of us relapse, is because we don't want to go to our support meetings. We don't want to involve ourselves with our churches and our families and all that, because it's so shame-based. And that's the most horrible thing about addiction in any area or state or country, is that there's nothing to be ashamed of for having a genetic illness that is treatable. And he mentioned cancer, diabetes and heart disease. People behave their way into some of those illnesses, but we don't hate them for that. And when we're addicts, and we're often looked at as the scum of the earth, well, I'm here to tell you, I am not the scum of the earth, and nor are any of the other people that I try to help. And if anybody needs help, I'll volunteer my email address, because I do that for free. That is something I do because what we do in recovery is service work. And we give back to the people who helped us stay sober, and we'll find help somewhere. And I know that's what he does for a living, and it's awesome.
We'll get all the email addresses and all the phone numbers out before we're done here.
Great.
You talk about one of the aspects is also prevention and education, and getting to the kids early enough to educate them as to the problems. And in several different cities that I've worked, I've been a big proponent of the DARE program. Drug education, resistance education, whatever it spells. I can't. Drug addiction?
Drug awareness.
Awareness, that's what it is. And I've spoken to those groups and at their graduations, and it's so awesome to see those wonderful 5th grade faces looking up and believing and buying in. You probably have a pretty good idea of how successful that is. At least it's something, right? Instead of going at it blindly.
The big thing about prevention with young people is bonding them with their community and with another adult other than their parent. And that's what those programs do. It's kind of a mentoring between law enforcement and teenagers and young children, that they understand that these adults in their community care about them. They care how they feel. I think that what we need to do to solve this problem is to talk about it more. I think this type of forum is outstanding. I don't know that this has happened before, and I'm thrilled to have this. And I think that if the whole community can start talking within their sphere of influence, at work, in your family, with your church groups, talk about this, brainstorm from ideas, talk to your children, talk early, and start talking about, the difference in drugs and candy when they're little, about not taking things from, putting things in their mouth from other people. And then the message progresses on as they age, about the dangers of tobacco or alcohol or marijuana, the things that they're being confronted with. And one of the main things is teach children how to handle their feelings. A lot of addiction comes from medicating pain and medicating emotional hurt and medicating those kind of things. They may start out because they've got a physical illness, but it ends up they're medicating some emotional pain. So I think teaching children how to deal with emotional upset, how to handle rejection, acceptance, success, and failure, and all those things that we experience in life, and giving them the skills that they need to get through, and make sure that they've got adults in their community that care about them, that are keeping them on track every step of the way, really does make a big difference. When we do studies on why kids don't use drugs, those are the more interesting studies than the ones about why kids do. And the ones that they don't, the number one reason that kids say is that because it would disappoint their parents or because it would disappoint another adult in their life, like their football coach or their Sunday school teacher or some role model adult in their life. And so I think that the adults have more of an influence on children than sometimes they realize. You think kids aren't paying attention, but they're listening to you, they're watching you, and they really do. If we set high standards for kids, the majority of the time kids will rise up to those standards. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work raising kids in today's world, and it's exhausting.
And they will be confronted no matter what the age. And if you're a young parent and you think your kids won't be confronted, that it's not going to happen to them or to you, you're fooling yourself, because it is every child will be confronted at some point by this. Let's go back to Kim for another question from social media. Hey, Kim.
Hey, here's one from a viewer who wants to know, when counseling and rehab doesn't work, what do you do? In the role all of you play, have you ever just given up on someone who repeatedly goes back to drugs?
Tommy, that's a good question. I'm going to start with you.
No, I mean, it's statistics state that it takes the normal person 7 times through treatment before it actually
7
clicks.
times.
And so it's one of those situations where I've had numerous people come through treatment 21, 22 times at different facilities, and it's one of those situations where they have to want to do it. It's, you know, the big book says you know works if you work, it won't if you don't. And so they've got to make the decision that they want to get better. It can't be anything forced on them. It can't be anything that it can't be something forced by a parent or a legal guardian. They have to be able to want to get better for themselves.
Know that not making it through one time and being in recovery then,
right,
that's not a weakness. It's just kind of standard operating procedure. It's hard. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, and it's a step in the process. So, and that's why, like, for instance, with Addiction Campuses, we have options for like step down and IOP, sober living, things available for people if they, once they get through primary treatment, they have other options available for them to help assimilate them back into the community. Like, for instance, an IOP, an intensive outpatient program, or a sober living program provides them opportunities to be able to continue to seek the same level of care, but then basically teach them how to go through their day-to-day life without the crutch of the addiction. So it helps as a good step down to actually promote that good, good recovery through the process.
There are a lot of working parts to this whole problem. A big part of it is obviously drug highways from Mexico, heroin coming up through the Southwest, and then how easy it is for a lot of folks to get these drugs through legitimate doctors who in many cases are breaking the law. We saw a great example here in the Mobile area just this past year. Dr. Zulu Ron and Dr. John Couch were both arrested for basically running a pill mill. And I've got a number here that just blows my mind, that they wrote more than 250,000 prescriptions during the span of just 4.5 years.
Wow.
That's that obviously is not being a doctor. It's being now a felon. They're both in prison for 20 years. And that's a big part of it. Talk about the medical side of it, and if there is a conversation going that's really perked up in the last couple of years.
No, there really has perked up this conversation. Medicine needs to clean up its own house. We can be part of the problem. Most of the physicians, most healthcare providers are good people trying to help good patients, but there are some that are straight up pill mills, and I think medicine's done a pretty good job about stopping that, but I think we can do better. One of the things Alabama's done is they have this website that I alluded to earlier where you can pull up patients to check and see how many prescriptions they've had. It's only linked though with 1 or 2 other states and not all the surrounding states. So we're technologically advanced. We can put someone on the moon. I think the next step is have this across all 50 states so that I can see if someone just got a prescription filled in Kentucky, Tennessee, and just running down the interstate getting prescriptions filled. We have the technology, we just need to invest in that. The states also put out mandates for chronic pain management that if you prescribe more than X amount per day or so many per month, you have to check that website. And starting next year, the Alabama Board of Medical Examiners mandates all physicians have to have a course on opioid addiction as to keep your license. So it's getting better. We're moving it sort of like turning a battleship, but I think we're getting there. We just need to continue to work on that.
And as those doctors continue to prescribe at that kind of rate, there is obviously the fallout. Listen to this man who was a patient of Dr. Couch.
I'm going through withdrawal. I called my primary doctor. They stated that they would not give me any medicine. I am supposed to go to the emergency room and go through withdrawals, and hopefully I don't die from this.
You know, that's pretty heavy stuff. You want to get off of it, but are you going to die from it? And I'm sure that both of you are well aware of people who have had some really tough times getting off.
Yeah, the day they shut down his clinic, my urgent care was just inundated
Really?
with people that may have been, they're all addicted at that point. Some are addicted and had feigned health problems, but there's others, cancer patients, people that have disc issues in their back and they really are in terrible, terrible pain, and they're in a bad situation. So what do you do? You know, I don't have a pain management license. I can't be that doctor for you. And so we also have a physician shortage nationally. So we're trying to get someone in and trying to get you to a credible doctor. I mean, it was a real problem there. I think that the dust has settled, but we get pinged, it seems like once a week, someone wanting us to be their pain management doctor, and we just say we can't. But it was a real problem then, and I think just pain management has its place. Yeah. What if you've got a brain tumor, lung cancer, chronic pain? But I think we talked about obesity. I think if we can change what we eat in the South, that helps back problems, knee problems, smoking, cancer problems, and sort of address it that way. But it's just sort of a multifactorial thing that we all need to work on.
Yeah. It's a vicious cycle, there's no doubt. We're getting near the end of the hour now, and I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to kind of, you know, give a plug to folks who are out there, because I'm sure there are people that saw that this was going to be on that are struggling with addiction right now. Tommy, go ahead and start with Addiction Campuses, and I know you have a 24-hour hotline you want to give out. Yeah, we have a 24-hour hotline, as well as my personal cell phone's 24 hours as well. That number is 601-940-5831. It's 24 hours. You can call me day or night, and I'll be glad to help you out, or find a facility that may be able to help you closer by if need be. Again, that number is 888-512-3321. 24-hour hotline. Get help any time of day, any day of the year, right? Yes, sir. Yeah, very important stuff. Christy, I know you wanted to give your email just to people who have a shoulder, somebody to talk with, somebody who's been through it, knows the battles, and almost succumbed to them. Yes. I'll be happy to help anyone locally, and you can email me at any time at akw114@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on Facebook Messenger, and I'll take many, many messages every day, and I'll make sure you find help somewhere. And something else I want to throw out for people to pay attention to, the families are as sick as the addicts, and codependency is a big deal. And that's sort of halfway defined by saying someone who works harder at the addict's disease than the addict, him or herself, in an attempt to control that situation. And I would encourage those people to reach out to groups like Al-Anon and different support groups that are there for them, because it's difficult to live with an addict. It's almost impossible. And to the lady who asked if it's okay to just walk away, it's okay to walk away from an addict. Sometimes you have to do it because it preserves your sanity, and sometimes if you let them hit that rock bottom, they might get help, which is the way it sort of happened for me. As long as rock bottom isn't suicide and death. Yeah, yeah. And you know, I've heard people say you can't love somebody to recovery. You can love them to death, though. Yeah. Literally. Exactly right. Yes. Yeah, yeah. And so we don't want to do that. Yeah, we're nearing the bottom or the end of the hour. Kim, I know you have another question for us. Yeah, if we can squeeze this question in real quick, because Ms. Wells just kind of touched on it a little bit. Someone wanted to know, how effective is family interventions, and how do you go about getting one or doing one? And I know, Virginia, that's probably something that you've dealt with as well.
family interventions are very effective, and you know, there's several different models of interventions. But if a family is interested in, you know, getting their loved one help and maybe possibly doing an intervention, please call us. We'll be glad to point them in the right direction. You know, families are different, and so they have different makeups and different people involved, different ages, different, you know, ability for what the family's willing to do. So interventions look different now. You know, there used to be kind of cookie cutter style of interventions, and now interventions are more tailored for specific situations and families, but we'll be glad to talk with families about what they can do and where they can get help and where the whole family can get help. Just like Christy said, it's not just getting help for the person with the disease of addiction, but it's also getting help for the entire family, because the whole family is hurting. In fact, sometimes family members are actually hurting more than the person with the substance use disorder. So.
We talked to Virginia a lot during the course of our news day. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stories about drug abuse in this particular area. We talk about Spice, we talk about others. Do you see the opioids as the #1 problem right now?
Yeah, opioids are a huge issue, and you know, we're not having as big an issue with like the heroin overdoses that we're seeing in, say, Birmingham and some of the northern parts of the state and
but
other
unfortunately,
areas.
we're usually the last, and that's
right. It's going to reach here, and you know, a lot of those deaths are a result of the heroin being tainted with fentanyl and carfentanil. You know, the heroin years ago came from China. Now it's coming from Mexico. It's very cheap, and the majority of the heroin on the streets, in fact, the majority of illegal drugs on the streets are tainted, which means, you know, whatever you're buying isn't pure in what you're buying. And so, you know, the fentanyl and carfentanil are the synthetic forms that are a lot more powerful. So if you're used to taking heroin and you have a certain dose you know you take, and then you end up with carfentanil in the heroin, it's deadly. You know, so we, you know, we want to educate the community about that, and we are that I-65, I-10 intersection of drug trafficking between Mexico, Florida, Detroit. You know, so drugs do pass through our community.
A lot of it.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Dr. O, some of the drugs that addicts can use. I know that Walgreens, 200 stores around the country are now making those drugs available over the counter without a prescription. Is that something you like to see, that it almost it's the antidote drug? What is that?
Narcan.
Yes,
Narcan.
right. Making that available. Do you think that is the right thing to do, or do you think that that is a situation where, well, I'm going to go ahead and shoot up heroin, I've got the antidote, it won't be a problem?
I think that's a double-edged sword. If it can save one life, yes, it's awesome. But in the emergency department, Narcan's half-life or duration of action may be this, but the overdose is this. So it's a false sense of security. You've overdosed, or your friends overdosed, you give them a shot of Narcan, they wake up, everyone thinks everything's okay, the Narcan wears off and they go back and
Really?
die. So if that's my son or daughter and it saved my life, thank you, God, for putting that in the pharmacy. But it's not the answer.
Yeah.
It's just another attempt to try and make things better. I don't know what's best. I'm sure it'll save someone's life, but it could also be that false sense of security.
Dr. Richard Euler, Virginia Guy, thank you so very much. Christy Wells and Tommy Whitten, you guys were awesome. We appreciate it. Let's go out on some phone numbers and some numbers for those of you who perhaps need some help. These are the numbers. I think we have a list of them. There they are. Drug Education Council, Addiction Campuses Hotline, and Al-Anon. Thanks so much for being with us. It was a very important conversation, and we appreciate all of you.